Hello, I'm Ben. Welcome to the channel. Today we're going to talk about folks that are a problem at work, right? There's been countless books, countless papers and subjects, discussions, YouTube videos on difficult people at work, uh, control freaks, and they just straight up jerks at work. I mean, there's tons of documentation around that, and all of us have been working with folks before in the past uh, that made things difficult, and you actually woke up in the morning not wanting to go to work that day because you knew you were going to have to deal with these people. It's an awful situation to be in, and I want to make some suggestions around that and just some signals of things that are going to be future trouble. So some of this stuff stands up and is pretty clear, and it stands out as a normal in any situation you want these people around you. But these are traits that are specifically for leaders to observe and for teammates to observe, so we get ahead of it. We recruit and specifically change out that situation so it doesn't impact yourself or your team in a greater capacity. The easiest way to run good teammates off is to keep bad teammates. The easiest way to run leadership off is to keep bad teammates. At the end of the day, recruiting, training, sustaining employees is the highest cost that businesses face across the country. That will be the case. Your workforce is always going to cost you the most. There are some businesses that are heavily leveraged in materials, so sometimes those material costs will, outpace what it costs to sustain the workforce. But in most business situations, your workforce is going to be your highest expenditure. So here you are, the 8 behaviors that signal problems currently and future trouble of 8 behaviors you want to prevent your team from having to deal with. Number 1 is they're late. If you want to start a day off poorly, allow one teammate to show up late and allow that to be a reoccurring issue. It basically de-energizes the team. If you do safety stretches or safety talks early in the morning and that person's never there, they don't get that safety piece. Or they get the augmented version, which is very short and not going to be to the point, which means that person, not only are they late and disrespecting those rules and their teammates in that, but they're also then putting the team at greater risk, and they're at greater risk for injury because they're not there for the specific discussions around safety and around proper procedure. So number 1 is they're late. Number 2 is they see problems and complain constantly about problems daily. That right there should be a red flag for anyone. People that are negative will quickly make everyone around them feel the same way. So if you have a situation where they come in daily and it's a negative attitude from square one, they're just not happy. Now everybody can go through things, right? Everybody goes through difficult times from time to time. So remember, we're not talking about a recency bias issue or for a today type issue. We're talking about a fixed pattern where people come in and they only see problems and don't see solutions. One of the things I did as a leader when I was working in local sites was that I invited anybody to bring a problem to me. But they knew the expectation is once that sentence was complete, the very next sentence was to be a suggestion on how to solve the issue. So I wanted them to bring me a problem, but also bring me a solution. And if you only had part of solution, bring me the part of solution. And as a team, we work on that to come up with the full solution. So that's the second piece. They see only problems. Third is they're easily disturbed. People that it takes very little to get them to blow up or to get out of line, those aren't people you want in a sustained environment anyway. Like we said earlier, there's always going to be difficult times. People are always going to go through things, whether it's health, family, divorce, financial issues, the police, whatever it may be. You're going to have issues come up just on a daily basis just because it's human nature. If they're easily disturbed, which means they have a chip on their shoulder, they're not able to take anything, nothing rolls off their back, as the old adage goes, then that's going to be a problem. They're going to be an issue for you later. Next piece is they criticize others. One of the things my grandmother used to say to me, if someone's pulling you aside to talk negatively about someone else, guess what they do when you're not in the room? They're going to not in the room. They're going to pull other people aside and talk negatively about you, right? So it's become an issue. It's become a recent occurrence where people complain on Facebook about folks. They complain online about folks. There's always comments. And now you got cyberbullying, most of which is stuff that's just folks criticizing folks for no reason. I'll go back to the understanding of human behavior. People behave and respond in a way that their specific and singular view of experience and life has taught them to respond. So they can't help but respond that way because that's who they are. If someone is consistently criticizing others, though, that is a very fast way to drive a wedge into any team and to cause people to party up and to have an issue where you don't have any type of positive movement or conversation between two different parties because you've now driven a wedge completely between it. It shows, from a maturity standpoint, it shows emotional intelligence. It shows that it's not there. But it also shows that if you get to that point that you're at an impasse, that's not a team any longer. Now you just have two roving bands that you're going to have to keep away from each other, like the Hatfields and McCoys, right? It's not a sustainable, positive situation. The next is they rush to make judgments. We all can be guilty of that, to make a judgment quickly from what we see, and not be objective in the overall thought. So in a work setting, that can be completely demotivating to your team, especially if the team has been spread too thin for too long. If you have a good boss, if you have a good leader, they understand what you go through and understand the season you're in, and they have a mature viewpoint of true empathy. And empathy meaning they understand the situation and they're trying to understand the way you feel, but ultimately as a leader they should be suggesting ways consistently and following up to make sure that those ways are sustained to improve the situation, to change it. So if you have someone, and I'll say a boss, if you have a boss where 90% of what you're doing is right and 10% is wrong, and they're focusing on the 10% and not doing anything to motivate the team with how great they're doing on the other 90, that's something you need to look at. That's one of those things where they're making judgments or they're criticizing as opposed to supporting and to building. That shows a short-term view, right? If they were a long-term player, they would know that this team is expensive. To replace this team would be incredibly expensive. And so what I need to do as a leader is to jump in and help them fix these problems, add the teammates necessary to help fix these problems, pay a pay wage that's significant enough to keep the teammates in place, the ones that you want to keep in place to fix these problems, and then sustain the result of the improved situation. If they're not doing that and they're just making judgments and criticizing what's being done, then you don't have a workable situation there, and it's not a positive environment. The next one is they're inflexible. It goes a little bit about a little bit to what we just spoke about. A person that doesn't understand their seasonalities of difficulty, where you have to be flexible at time, and anytime you want to be of any significant tenure in business, you have to be flexible. If you expect the same result when the country's in a recession, in one of the other videos I mentioned that the country has been in 33 recessions since America's been around, and that those recession periods totaled 48 years, that's a pretty incredible statistic. There's businesses that have been around for over 100 years in this country, which means at times they had to be flexible. The cash flow was diminished. The workforce was diminished. The customer reaction and need was diminished. And through all that, to be something that lasts, to have tenure and have a true possibility of being a company that is perpetual, you have to be flexible. If folks aren't flexible, they're inflexible as a personality trait, they're not going to work out for you or for your team. And as people go through things, that's how you focus on recent issues or recency bias and things of that nature, if you're not being flexible to assist those who may have covered you back when you were sick or you had an issue. So flexibility is extremely important in a team, to show care and show empathy and to be act as one cohesive unit. The next one is an interesting call out. Enthusiasm. They don't seem enthusiastic. So work is work, right? If you have work-life balance, it's easier to maintain enthusiasm because you come in refreshed and ready to get after it. So it's easy to maintain enthusiasm. However, if people are spread too thin, and if they're spread thin for an extenuating period of time, for an extreme period of time, for months on end, they're spread too thin, you should understand why they're losing that enthusiasm. And it should be a trait that you're trying to see and you're looking for. And if they're not enthusiastic because they're spread thin, you need to do something quickly to get them relieved, to give them some type of resolve to take care of that teammate and the team they support. If you don't, and you don't see them recover that enthusiasm, now you're dealing with a teammate that's burnout, and that means that you may risk losing a valuable teammate because you've not paid attention to that enthusiasm. If this teammate or this person or this leader or this boss or whatever you want to call this person in this situation is not enthusiastic naturally, then I would say hopefully you made that decision in your interviewing process. So my suggestion is the higher the level goes, the more interviews you require because the person needs to sustain the enthusiasm and the engagement throughout. If they cannot sustain that throughout the interview process and you don't see examples of that in their background, then when you hire them, you're going to run into a much more significant situation when you're saying their day-to-day life throughout a longer period is going to be an obstacle for them as well as the job. So you know that enthusiasm is going to diminish there as well. So you got to pay attention to that in hiring. Hire right, and then you should be better in the long run. And then the last one that I would call out is they don't accept their mistakes. So that would be number 8, and that's one of the primary things I want to talk about. A lot of times when someone is not enthusiastic, they're always negative. They're always looking to find blame instead of trying to find solutions. They're inflexible in expectations on dates and when things should be turned around. They don't show empathy. They don't show care. They don't show understanding of a regional or locational constraint or a team-specific constraint or an individual-specific constraint. They're not assuming that their teammates are a 10 when they come in. Because that's what you should be doing in all fairness. When you're thinking that someone's going to be career, you should see them as a 10. You should let them fall short of that expectation. That's called failing forward. When they fall short of that expectation, you should set then a group of expectations down that you discuss, and you have an action pattern to come off of that. If you don't do those things, and you're not supportive to that team, then the next thing that's going to happen is the word is accountability that's always thrown around. Often when we don't want to accept our mistakes, we make other people accountable for it through what they do. Using a personal example, I worked with a leader who liked to micromanage situations. That Control Freak book that I showed, I actually read that back when I was dealing with some of these things. And the micromanagement was so extreme. You would see that in a room you had 15 or 20 people that are extremely well trained, had fantastic backgrounds, had done any number of very difficult things in their historical career. Fantastic, intelligent group of people sitting in a room. It was being micromanaged to the point that they couldn't make a decision from pay rates to hiring to how they wanted to do this or that within their field of scope. What ultimately comes from that is you have completely disengaged folks that can't make moves that they would have made elsewhere. They can't have an impact as quickly as they would elsewhere. And because they're being micromanaged in a way, they can't make the proper decisions for the team. Kind of goes back to, in the military, boots on the ground. The people there with the picture that see what's going on are better to make the decisions than a general that's 3,000 miles away. It's the same thought process. Proximity matters. The proximity of the team, who's in the trenches, those are the people that have the valuable information. And the biggest piece around people owning their mistakes, the quicker you own a mistake, the faster you move beyond it. So if you own a mistake, you can look at that and say, all right, I made this mistake. And that's one thing that I'll often do. If I have a team that's at an impasse, I'll say, okay, guys, this is my fault. This is my fault. I should have explained this better. And so when I say that, the team goes, okay, it's his fault. He's not trying to hunt somebody for blame here. So now we can all get together and fix it. And you can see that sigh, that relief, that resolve and re-engagement happen if you're willing to get in there and do that. You say, okay, guys, this is my fault. So what are we going to do next, and how do we prevent this happening again? What it does is it creates an environment where people feel comfortable speaking up, which generates future leaders, but it also generates engagement. If you want to engage a team, let them come up with a solution and let them fix the problem you're facing. And by doing that, they will be engaged. They own the answer because it's theirs and they came up with it too. Much more engaged to solve the problem and sustain that process as a best practice. That is the way you build a team. That's the way you sustain a team, and that's the way you build a business that will last for years. If you're not doing those things, if you're micromanaging, if you're not accepting your mistakes, if you're not allowing people to accept their mistakes, so you're not creating an environment where people feel safe to make a mistake, to fail forward so they can learn for it and then grow. And that's the only way you grow leaders. If you're not cultivating that environment, you're creating a significant problem for the business and a significant problem for the future growth of your team. These are all subjects that I like talking about. These are all subjects that I've read tons of books about and I've taught thousands of teammates about. And in mentorship programs, all of these things should actually be part of that to show people how to address things specifically and then move beyond it. So these are 8 signals that show later trouble. No matter how you're looking at them, you can look at them objectively from a position, from a leadership, or from a coach standpoint. And that should create positions where people feel more comfortable in making mistakes, coming up with resolutions to mistakes, and sustaining those resolutions, which then create best practices that moves everybody forward. So failing forward is a key portion of growth and is a key portion of business. So hopefully you've enjoyed this video. I talk about a lot of this stuff often with teams, and when I'm doing consulting gigs with small businesses, the same problems that small businesses and large businesses have. The only difference is the scale, the scope and scale. But if you have less money, then it means a greater deal to you at those smaller locations. And big companies, sometimes, they don't bend over to pick up the dollars because they're too fast or too quickly chasing cents. And this is some of those things that add up to dollars in the long run. Sustaining team and selecting team, training team, mentoring team, long-term plans with team, that's the biggest expenditure American business and global business is up against today. And that will not change. It's been the same for thousands of years. It's just what we need to focus on, and this is some suggestions that may improve that with you. If you found value in the video, if you like what we put out, please subscribe. Please share it with folks that may benefit from it as well, and please look out for what we may have coming in the future. I appreciate you. Be good.